Hello, good evening and good afternoon, and welcome to this, the 161st edition of Old Romans Unscripted. And as you can see, we've a full panel with us today. We have both Father Gerke and Bishop Kelly. As usual, please say hi in the comments. It's always nice to read and see your greetings. And if we can, we will try and include your greetings in or your comments in the discussion. So, Excellency, how are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. And how are things with you?
Yes, not too bad, not too bad. And with you, Father Thomas?
Doing all right.
Good. Well, there's no feedback from the sound, so that's good. I'm trying something slightly different here. I've sort of separated my camera and the studio, and it's I think it's working, which is good. Hello, Peggy, one of our regulars from East Tennessee. Greetings to you. Greetings to you, Paul Newman. Greetings to Barbara, who's says Facebook user, but good evening from across the valley. I know that means from me. So that's Barbara, and to John as well. Gave us an excellent question last week. And yes, Excellency, are you feeling better?
I am. Yeah, I'm definitely on the mend. So I'm glad to be here and be a little bit more mobile. So that's good.
Excellent. And your sound is perfect, which is also good. So last week, of course, and I was surprised when I looked, just happened to glance earlier in the week at the number of viewers of last week's episode, because A, because it was a solo episode, B, we started late because I was ironing altar linen and hadn't been watching the time, and then most of the show was answering one question, but nonetheless, it seems to have generated some considerable interest. And this week, I suppose, as always, it's a sort of continuation of similar stuff. So, Adversus, Haereses, against heresies, famous title of a great tome by St. Irenaeus, who, of course, was writing against the Gnostic heresy, right back, I think, in the 3rd century. But is the title of our episode this evening, as, of course, in recent weeks, more and more of Our Lady's prophecies seem to be realizing themselves. And one of those, of course, was that bishops would be pitted against bishops and cardinals against cardinals. And, of course, provoked by the recent closure of the German Synodal Weg, has been some reactions, most notably, of course, from Cardinals Burke and Müller, who have both suggested in the World Over program on EWTN with Raymond Arroyo, their reaction was that the bishops concerned should be tried for heresy. And this, of course, is in response to the suggestion by the Synodal Weg for the ordination of women and for the blessing of same-sex unions. And, of course, that's particularly topical at the moment because the Church of England here, meaning the by law established state religion, has just agreed to bless same-sex unions. And one very infamous commentator, Deacon Calvin Robinson, went viral with a speech that he gave at the Oxford Union in a debate about that very subject. So perhaps let's get some initial reactions from our panelists. Let's start with Bishop Kelly. your reaction to the reaction of Cardinals Burke and Müller?
Well, I'm not aware of it. I haven't been watching or reading many current religious affairs magazines or podcasts or programs. But it's kind of what do you expect from a horse but a kick? I mean, you could have seen this coming months ago. I'm far from shocked. I would have been shocked had they not come out with this sort of stuff. Also, I'm not shocked that Burke and Müller would call for their trial. I think they've just dug in now, and they don't really care what they say. I mean, they may have been got a bit more guarded 10 years ago in their statements, and I say a bit because they got themselves in trouble back then too. But I am glad that somebody has taken a stand, even if it's just a few. They're willing to put their neck on the line for the truth, let's face it, and call these people out for what they are. Germany has been trouble for 500 years. It's a strange dichotomy because you do get this sort of, I don't know if it's a cultural or an intellectual movement, but it does tend towards heresy, or certainly flirting with it. Of course, the obvious, but there are many others. The obvious is, the Protestant Reformation, and of course then the characters at Vatican II, including Ratzinger, to a degree, early Ratzinger. So I'm not sure if it's cultural, if it's the intellectual zeitgeist that has happened in Germany that's given rise to this. But on the other side, you get in places like Bavaria and in and around Cologne. I believe Müller is from Bavaria. You get a very solid Catholicism. You get a Catholicism that burgeoned in the Counter-Reformation and in Bavaria and Austria, a deeply devotional and loyal expression of the faith. So it is a strange place, and of course, we think of Germany today, but it's not even a few hundred years old. Excuse me. It's an amalgamation of all these principalities and states. So what we think of as German is not as homogeneous as you would think, both politically, religiously, etc. And there's a lot of history and political wranglings that go behind that. However, as I said at the beginning of this, I'm not surprised they came out with what they said. And I'm not surprised at the reaction of characters like Cardinals Burke and Müller. It would be interesting to see how so-called established Rome and the Curia and Pope Francis deals with it. Do they quash it with an eye to, now it's been said, now it's out there, we'll see how people react, which is a very Roman response. Or do they take it on board and at least open it up to discussion at the Synod of Synods of Synods? Or do they throw themselves behind it? I can see all three scenarios unfold, but it's a kind of, that's the wild card. I think the German Synod I would have predicted. And I don't think the bookmakers would have given me great odds on it, as the response from Burke and Müller. But I do think the wild card will be to see how official Rome deals with it. So it is a bit of a watch this space as regards Vatican City.
Yeah. And Father Thomas, I mean, do you think Rome will respond?
No, sadly, no. I don't think they will. I think Rome is just going to kind of let this play itself out. I would not bet that Francis gets involved. I think
can I just jump in there? That in itself is a response to not
right.
respond.
Well, I mean, yes, it is in itself. Yeah. So by the omission, the response will be omission. And I think you just see the way the behavior that Francis has taken throughout all these controversies. I mean, there's still a dubia that's how many years old unanswered. Not to bring up old wounds or anything, but I mean, and you just even look at the fraternity crisis, right? FSSP promised a bishop in the 80s. Where's that? And so, I mean, you go on, and so many controversies that have happened in the modern era that Rome has not answered definitively. They just keep kicking the can down the alley, if you will. I mean, maybe it's the horse that's kicking the can down the alley. Who knows? To go off of Bishop Kelly's response, but yeah, I don't think there's going to be anything done officially from Rome's side. I think this is going to cause more division amongst clergy, prelates, religious, and unfortunately cause more division within the faithful. That's the real crux of the matter, is the dividing of the faithful. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. And that's what we're seeing. That's what the devil wants. He wants souls to go to him, whether they know it or not. And it's through division. So that's the real crux from all this is.
Yeah. And I suppose, yes. And I think one of the really concerning aspects of the German phenomenon is the fact that it is seemingly shepherds who are leading this. Is it Basing, who's the president, and who said, "Oh well, when we were in Rome for Ad Limina, Francis just sort of told us, do what you want to do," which seems a bit strange because, as I recall, Francis made a point of not seeing them during the Ad Limina, and instead they had interviews with the heads of various dicasteries, particularly the CDF. But as you rightly point out, Francis is not quick or reliable in making a response. And as I was saying last week, that's largely why it's problematic to call him a formal a material heretic, because he never actually clarifies anything.
Well, can I interject? He's not quick to make a response when it comes to matters of faith and morals. But when it comes to the environment and other social justice matters, he is Johnny on the spot with giving his 2 cents on that.
Absolutely.
Just to make so he does respond quickly when it's matters of the environment, and social justice. Yeah. But when it actually comes to matters of tradition, faith, and morals, and the actual Catholic faith, he kind of just sits back and just doesn't say anything much.
Yeah. And like I said last week, I think at the moment, at least, the German Synod are not producing great tomes of theological treatises to back up what they voted for. And again, until or unless they do, it's difficult to call them out for material heresy. And of course, even if they did, we would, questions would have to be asked, and they'd have to stubbornly refuse to refute those theological positions. And as you say, Bishop Kelly, I think, Francis is perhaps likely to leave this for the synod and synodality to address, but which itself, of course, is a nonsense. As Cardinal Burke said, they write pages and pages and pages, and he still doesn't know what it actually means. And as Cardinal Müller pointed out, there are all sorts of people with voting rights in the synod who aren't bishops. So again, what kind of episcopal synod is this? And as we've all stated before, well, it's Vatican III in all but name. And by perhaps saying nothing and letting it go until the synod and synodality, that's what Francis wants to see, what the spirit of chaos or the god of surprises or whatever other euphemism he likes to coin, what it will throw out. Interesting times. Now, also in the past couple of weeks, of course, some interesting developments regarding Traditionis Custodes. So Cardinal Roche on BBC Radio 4 made an admission, which I think is worthy of note, in a discussion about the traditional Latin Mass and about the clampdown on it, etc. Roche said, well, of course, we have a different theology now from the old Mass, the new Mass. Now, I was reading Peter Kwasniewski's Facebook profile. There was an animated discussion on there, as you can imagine, and Peter was saying, well, of course, that's just the thing, the theology hasn't changed, and several others were saying, oh, he's wrong because the theology hasn't changed. And I put, finally they've admitted it. Because as anyone knows who has studied the history and the development of the Novus Ordo Missae, and as its original general instruction of the Roman Missal stated, it was a new theology. It was conceived to be expressive of a new theology of the Eucharist, that it was now about a meal and not about a propitiatory sacrifice, and that it was all about as we've said before, it's anthropocentric in its form and in its execution. So that was an interesting development, and of course Cardinal Roche has been slated by various other commentators since for saying what they call a category error, to say that it's a new theology, and yet isn't that the point? It is a new theology. Father Thomas.
Yes. For once, he's telling the truth.
Oh, Bishop Kelly.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most shocking revelation there is they actually gave a clear, decisive answer. Like, they put their cards on the table finally and said what we've all known for the past decades. They wanted a new theology. They made a new theology. They created a liturgy around the new theology and have finally said it's a new theology. Fair play.
just some more later greetings appearing there from the comments. Bishop Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, it is something we've known for quite some time. I am surprised he let it slip and said that, or perhaps he didn't. Who knows? But as regards to scandal to the faithful, thank the Lord he was being interviewed on Radio 4, so his audience reach wouldn't be huge.
Austin Avery and about that. That's about it.
Yeah. In between, seasons of Egyptian mosque chanting and Sophiatic stories or something. Anyway, yeah, I mean, it's to me this is sort of a non-story because we've known this. It is a complete beginning. I mean, as you rightly said, the original instruction to the missal stated as much. Many people in the early days of the promulgation of the new mass stated as much. Then there was sort of a bit of a sort of a rowback on it to try to sort of placate people in the 1980s to say, oh, no, this is just a continuation. This is a natural outgrowth or burgeoning of what we've always believed. But it's clear to anybody with, 2 or 3 brain cells rattling around, it's got very little to no connection with the original mass or indeed the mass of the church fathers of the early church. It is more in common with the Reformed tradition, which was its intent to, which was part of its intent, than it was to tradition. I mean, I can see, and I've experienced that Orthodox priests that go to the traditional Latin Mass find a lot in common. They go to the new one and they leave scratching their heads out of saying, "What was that?" It's quite unrecognizable, whereas the traditional one is to them. And instead of going that direction, which would have, to me, have been the logical, if you're playing, what to play the ecumenism card, would be go towards the east, apart from Paul VI and his photo ops. But they chose to go towards the Reformation. And its fruits have been seen because the modern Catholic Church is going down the same trajectory as the Reformed churches. They're dwindling, they're becoming crazy in their theology, they're forgetting the teachings of Christ and, taking up the teachings of the zeitgeist. They are bending to the world, which is not surprising when you put man as the center of the world and of creation and not God, that it's going to move that direction. And by their fruits you shall know them. Instead, you look at the Orthodox Church in the East, how it has rebuilt after the onslaught of communism, how it is a dynamic church, certainly in Russia and Eastern Europe, attracting a lot of, which would have, their grandparents perhaps would have been Orthodox Christians, but a lot of people are, in a sense, returning to part of their tradition and living it out. I mean, you talk about, and we've talked about here, about being present in the marketplace, living your faith, bearing witness about how you live. I mean, these young, and particularly men, but men and women are raising great families. They are on fire with zeal for the church and its traditions, If you took a modern Catholic aside and an Orthodox churchgoer and asked them about the tradition of the church fathers, of the practices of the desert fathers in early Christianity, one of them could answer and the other would be scratching their head, and I'll leave it to you to figure out which one's which.
Yeah.
Because they hear it preached. I mean, they hear it preached from, well, they don't use pulpits, but they hear it preached at the liturgies. All we hear preached is, social justice and environment and other issues that, while important in and of themselves, is not the center of Christianity or Christian worship or tradition. It doesn't tell people how to live, well, not tell, but direct people on how to live wholesome and full Christian lives, to be truly part of the body of Christ, to imbibe, to use a Eucharistic euphemism, to imbibe Christ, and to consequently bring that to others and live the mandate of Christ, about bringing that good news to the ends of the earth. So, yeah.
Father Thomas?
So you're saying, Your Excellency, that us Franciscans can't embrace the forest and the trees and the birds, and the seas and the sky, the sun and the moon, that our center of the universe can't be the environment? You're so rigid.
No, but you can. I mean, you can embrace creation, but it has to be within a context. It has to be your love for creation, your love for the environment, for the seasons, are all rooted in Christ, who is the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow. That creation flows from God, and how we work in the image and likeness of God is our own creative nature, whether it be literature, poetry, music, art, architecture, that need to create. Now we live in a fallen world where that is counterbalanced with the need to destroy. Starting with Cain and Abel, starting with Adam and Eve, who destroyed an understanding with God or a command of God. It's about the Christian life, is about our proper exercise of our free will, which we've been endowed with. So we choose to create or to destroy. We choose to work in the image of God, or in the rejection of the image of God. Our consolation is that we're made in that image, so therefore our direction, we are directed towards God, but it's about figuring that out, and that's what good pastors, good bishops, and priests and religious, by their example and by their schooling and by their taking care of the sick and all of that, can lead people to an understanding of that, can direct people to fulfilling God's will for them, to living in harmony with not just creation, but in harmony with the Creator, and doing what God has purposely placed them in this world to do. So we can embrace the environment, but do we put God as the mover of creation, and Christ the Redeemer and the author of salvation of all creation? St. Paul talks about groaning with the expectation of Christ. Or do we put Greta Thunberg at the center? Do we put man at the center? No, I think we have to trust in God. We have to respect God's creation. It's all part and parcel, but it's not the be all and end all. It shouldn't become a false God, and that's unfortunately what happens.
Yeah. And of course, another dimension to it all that Cardinal Müller touched on in his interview with Raymond Arroyo was that, this this progressive theology is, basically a form of Gnosticism. And this is why trans ideology, etc., is so antithetical to the gospel and the Catholic faith, because our religion is incarnational. It's about the reconciliation of the spirit and the flesh, whereas trans ideology is a form of Gnosticism, because it's about divorced knowledge. It's one can have an innate sense of self without reference to anything about oneself in the physical reality. Which is why, of course,
I mean, you mentioned Saint Irenaeus at the beginning, but Gnosticism is the sleeping heresy which pops up in the history of the church from time to time, and we see it yet again. You have it in the early church. You have it then in the medieval church. You have it again nowadays. I mean, and in between all of those epochs, it rears its head in certain ways. And of course, most people don't know what it is or haven't studied it because they haven't read church fathers or church history, and they don't know what to watch for. But yes, I think you're right. It's a clear manifestation yet again of Gnosticism. And for those who don't know, Gnosticism basically boiled down to its complete bare bones is the harboring of a secret knowledge rather than revealed knowledge, as revealed in scripture and tradition. It's another hidden knowledge that only a few are admitted to, and in a sense is often placed higher than revealed knowledge. When you brought up Irenaeus, it reminds me of a joke. I'm sure both of you have heard this, but maybe for our listeners, that somebody once asked a Dominican priest what the difference between the Dominicans and the Jesuits were, and the good friar said that the Dominicans were founded to combat the heresy of the Albigensians, which were another Gnostic group in the 1100s, mostly in southern France. But the Dominicans were founded to combat the heresy of the Albigensians, and the Jesuits were founded to combat the heresy of Protestantism. In answer to your question, when's the last time you met an Albigensian? However, it's not it's not as funny as you think, because I think we're now becoming surrounded by a form of Albigensians that again, is another facet of Gnosticism raises.
Well, as is indeed to a point Protestantism, with the notion of revelation and private interpretation, and the whole. I was at a meeting earlier this week of the Free Speech Union, or at least the local chapter, and a very interesting presentation was given there. Somebody was talking about Kantian philosophy having, a product of the Enlightenment, and having had, and that the subjectivism that we see today is basically derived from Kantian philosophy, and the notion of personal and subjective relativity. And but of course, at the same time, I don't think it's an accident that Enlightenment, sort of followed suit after the Reformation, after Protestantism, because again, it's about being able to read the scriptures for yourself and interpret them for yourself. without recourse to, hundreds of years of collective wisdom, scholarliness, and experience, but instead is all reduced down to the individual, and how they read it and how they interpret it. And of course, that's the issue, the prevailing issue in the contemporary zeitgeist now, is subjectivism and relativism. People always say to you, that's your truth, or that's true for you, that's not the same for me, etc. And and this was, I made reference to it last week, but this was seen in Vatican II, in documents like Nostra Aetate, where we're told that elements of truth can be found in other religions. Now, there may be, in one sense, there's maybe some truth to that, but if it's there, it's coincidental. It's not part of revelation. And again, earlier this week, I try not to watch him very often, but Michael Lofton, of the Faith and Reason channel, Reason and Theology channel, was trying to explain the Abu Dhabi declaration that Francis had signed with a leading Muslim about God, and he made reference to the intervention of Bishop Schneider, and that in a very Jesuitical way, Francis, tried to explain, well, there was the difference between God's antecedent will and consequential will. So the phrase, the worrying phrase was, God wills all religions to exist. And of course, Bishop Schneider said, nah, that doesn't sound right. To which, Francis was trying to say, well, it's, of course, God didn't originally want all these religions to exist, but the fact that they exist, he allows them to exist. And therefore, that's an manifestation of his will. It's incredible to see if you study it. Not just the decline numerically in terms of adherence to true faith, to the true religion, but also the decline in understanding of it, which we see from really the beginning of the 19th century onwards, 20th century onwards. But as I pointed out to somebody the other day, well, Pius X issued his oath against modernism and required all clergy to make it at the beginning of the 20th century. So, the modernism was already an issue then, and had been throughout the 19th century. When you started having the biblical criticism and Wittgenstein and all that stuff. Crazy. Well, speaking of Bishop Schneider, he of course has come out rather surprisingly in the past couple of weeks to say that it's perfectly okay, and indeed should be encouraged for traditionalist-minded priests to continue to offer the traditional Latin Mass in defiance and irrespective of anything that comes from Rome, and if necessary to continue to do this in the catacombs, as it were, in secret places. Your reactions to that?
It's a brave thing for him to say. But I would argue, is it really in defiance? I mean, you either defy modern Rome, or you defy what's written at the beginning of the Missal of Trent, which states clearly that this missal is for all time and for all priests, and they have the right to say it, and not one bit of it may be changed, etc., etc. So where does your allegiance lie? To centuries of tradition, or to a new beginning? I think I'm quoting Archbishop Rowe. Yeah, it seems like a jarring thing for Catholics to hear, because we are all, in a sense, programmed to be obedient to the Pope and to Rome, and which we should. But when they themselves go against tradition and or revelation, or even skirt with heresy, ultimately it's not the Pope of Rome or the cardinals of various dicasteries that will stand in front of our Lord at the judgment on our behalf. It'll be us. We will be made answer to the choices that we've made, to the faithfulness of our conscience, and how faithful we have been to Christ. So it's not as shocking, although on the surface, for any dyed-in-the-wool or traditional Catholic, it can sound that way, or appear to be that way, of calling on disobedience to Rome. But I would argue, is it really disobedience? I mean, which Rome are you talking about? The new Rome?
Well, exactly. I mean, as Archbishop Lefebvre famously said, we adhere to eternal Rome.
Yeah.
And again, as somebody pointed out the other day, which didn't mean Rome until the council, but means eternal Rome. Eternal meaning forever. But Father Thomas?
I mean, what more can be added? It's just, I mean, I'm often reminded, you look back in the history of the church, the persecution of the church in England, Ireland, where people were going out into the woods for the mass on mass rocks, and you had the priest holes. And I'm often reminded of that every day when I offer mass here at the friary. Just this little altar and a niche and a wall, but yet it roots me to the ancestry of the faith. And I think, the faithful thought nothing of it back then. In Japan, where, the persecution of faith, and so many countless other areas that we don't even know, that were not made famous through church history, but where the mass was attacked, the faith was attacked, but yet the faithful kept fighting. The only difference is we're being attacked from within. Where should be our friends and our comrades in arms are becoming our enemies. We are under friendly fire, and still under the enemy fire as well. And that's the only really difference is that we're facing, is we're getting attacked on both sides. And, for those who desire to be with the Lord, desire to save their souls, they know. And they'll fight. For those who are lost, hopefully we can save them. Hopefully we can send out our lifelines, and they'll grab on and be brought back into tradition, and know that, as we've said many times, to defy an unjust rule is not defiance. And it's difficult, though. It is. I struggled with it in my early years coming into tradition. When you were raised Novus Ordo, obedience to the Pope, understanding the catechism that the Pope is the head of the church, that the Pope is what unifies the faithful. It's what unifies the church. It's what separates us from Protestants, from heresy. When you look at all the other churches and world denominations, we have the Pope, the successor of Peter, the vicar of Christ. And when you see that dysfunction and you see that division coming from the Pope. You're like, well, hold on a second. Indefectibility, infallibility, what's going on here? What's happening? It's difficult. It's not easy. It's hurtful. It's something that we struggle with. But yet, the traditional faith, learning the traditional faith, seeing the traditional liturgy, being part of the traditional liturgy now as a priest, having that living, breathing inside of me, and it gives you comfort. You fight the good fight. It gives you the energy and strength you need, the nourishment you need to fight. So the best thing we can do is be charitable. The best thing we can do is invite those who don't know tradition to tradition. Be that positivity that they need. If today, the proper last gospel, right? Where our Lord said, "I'm the light of the world. I'm the truth." We need to be that light in darkness. My seraphic father, Saint Francis, often recalled talking about being alto Christus, being another Christ, being the light in darkness. As long as there's one flame of light shining, darkness has not won.
Yeah. And I think as well, today is Lady Day, the Feast of the Annunciation. And, we ourselves, each and every one of us, is presented in a very similar way, not in obviously quite the same way as Our Lady was, but we each of us are presented in a way, and one could even say perhaps by our guardian angels, who are certainly trying to prompt us and provoke us into embracing God's will for our lives. And it is in seeking to be faithful to Jesus Christ, and in seeking to be faithful to the gospel and to the faith of the apostles, that we turn to tradition and remain traditionalists. And of course, and it is rather ironic in many respects that of course, and we speak very freely here about our issues with the papacy, and yet all traditionalists are pro papal, pro the papacy, for everything that you've just described. And when people turn around and say, "Oh, you're not under the Pope, so therefore you can't be Catholic," it's really quite a bizarre thing for them to suggest, because actually it's because we care about the papacy and what the papacy is and what it should be, that we resist, that we are that we have suffered this estrangement. Now, for most traditionalists, that estrangement has only been 50 years. For us, it's been an awful lot longer. And again, often people say, well, why have the old Romans, been resistant for so long? And actually, it's because, like I was saying before, this has been an issue and a problem with the church for a long time. Vatican II arguably was climatic or a pinnacle, but there was a long road that took the church to Vatican II, and it is if you listen to Bishop Williamson's favourite topic of the 7 ages of the church, when he discusses the Enlightenment, it's obvious that what's happened, really the crisis in the church descends from there. But as I said, also from Protestantism.
And I would remind people that often say, being resistant to Rome. I'm like, well, we're not being resistant to Rome. Rome's being resistant to us. we have had many times dialogue and outreach to Rome to try to help them see their errors and rectify the crisis in the church. And us, SSPX, and many other traditional orders have tried countless times to reach out to Rome to rectify the problem. It's not like, we're sitting in our corner huffing and puffing and throwing a tantrum. I know, ironic for me to say that, but but that's the truth. The truth is, if you see countless times throughout history, we have tried to rectify with Rome. We don't want to be estranged from Rome, but yet, what I think all three of us and many more other traditional clergy would agree on is giving pastoral advice when somebody comes to us and they're in a abusive situation, a spouse or family member or something. One of the first things we will say is it safe to separate yourself from this other person, from the abusive situation? Now, that doesn't mean if you're married getting a divorce or an annulment necessarily, but remove yourself so you're safe for the time being while hopefully we can rectify the situation and, resolve the abuse. And so that's kind of, it's not ideally the best analogy to use, but I think it's something that most people can kind of relate with. They know somebody, or hopefully, but yet you're striving to rectify it so that way we're not resisting, to be resistance, to be Protestant. We're rather resisting and distancing yourself from the abuse that we see taking place right now. These traditional diocesan clergy that have been abused. Oh, you can have the mass. No, you can't. Oh, you can only have the mass on the third Saturday of the month when the moon hits the stars in the right angle and Saturn aligns with Jupiter and so on and so forth. No, that's ridiculous. It's abuse and it's nonsense. But that's and you see these diocesan priests struggling with it, and they're being up so much. And I have so many brother clergy friends that they're 30 years old and they look like they're 80 because of the past few years, because all they want to do is offer the mass. They want to offer tradition. They want to give communion on the tongue, kneeling to their faithful. They want to have a great Eucharistic devotion to our Lord in the holy sacrifice of the mass. They want to have reverence, but yet they can't anymore. It's being taken away from them, and it's a pain. And but that's what we're dealing with, and that's why we don't resist for the sake of resisting. We resist so we can save ourselves and not be abused that way, so we can be strong, be strength, be the light in the darkness, so others can come to us and receive and have refuge.
Yeah, and I think that's and the other thing that I think to note is that, again, as I called it last year, I think it was, I coined the phrase enclavism. But just because there are traditionalist pockets, and whether or not they have the approbation to exist, that's not good enough. That's not the faith. The Catholic faith is for the whole church, not just for pockets and groups of traditionalists. And the cause for the mass is the cause for the faith. And again, clearly, that's what Archbishop Lefebvre made clear. It's not just about, and we've said many times on this program, it's not just about the ascetics, it's about the faith. And so it's not just about priests everywhere being able to offer the TLM or not. It's Summorum Pontificum was better than nothing, but it wasn't everything. What really we need is for the Pope to say, right, no more of this Novus Ordo. We go back to the traditional mass, and then we sort everything out. But you can't have the faith without the liturgy that conveys it. Lex orandi, lex credendi. And then, of course, lex vivendi. And that's more to the point, the issue that we see today prevalent amongst Catholics under the new order is, the manifestation or lack thereof of the faith in their lives. Lex orandi, lex credendi, lex vivendi. Catholics just don't live the Catholic faith in anything like they used to. People look gone out when you talk about devotional practices and traditional Catholic family customs, etc., that were commonplace before Vatican II, but which very quickly subsided in the 70s and 80s, so that today there are generations of Catholics who the thought of a family rosary is shocking to them, because they're so secularized have their attitudes become, and this is an issue particularly manifest in the West. Catholics have succumbed to the world, and it is worldly attitudes that we see informing the progressive theological agenda. It is worldly attitudes that we see manifest in church politics. It's worldly values and ideologies that are ultimately antithetical to the gospel. And this is the serious and real nature of the crisis in the church. And it's, I get so annoyed, people to, all these various commentators, these lay Catholics who think they're very clever, discussing whether or not the SSPX or people like us are in schisms and so forth, who themselves don't actually understand what the Catholic faith is, who themselves don't live real Catholic lives, and who themselves, and it's obvious by the way they speak, the manner of their dress, the way they conduct themselves, they may be reactionary to the zeitgeist, but they are themselves embodiments of it. And again, Bishop Williamson has said this very often, that you can have bright young men be corrupted by going to university. Mm-hmm. Because there they receive, they study, they are fed these soft socialist principles and ideas, etc. And we know, I know of several people who have professed a vocation to ministry, who going on to study theology in the contemporary universities have sometimes lost their faith.
Yeah. I mean, I know, and the worst part is they go on and get ordained. They lost their faith, like either they leave the seminary and their vocation is lost, or they go through, but they become a social justice warrior, not a Catholic priest.
Yeah, they become a social worker, or
right. So that's the troubling thing.
That's and that's a real problem. The crisis in vocations is that so many young men who think they have a vocation to priesthood see it and understand it in terms of social work and social activism, and not as a primarily religious vocation to live and offer sacrifice.
And I would just point people who may be viewing this who do have a vocation or discerning one. Your Grace, you gave a great series of talks on vocations. I think you have that outlined on the channel. I think it's under vocations. I would encourage people, if you're discerning, have questions about that, go back and watch those videos by His Grace, because I've watched them all. and I've rewatched some of them, and I've shared them, and they're on point. They're good. I think it's a very great resource that we have on our channel available to people who are discerning. So make use of that, please. But I just before I lose it, I thought I did have kind of a point to make with the lay people, right? Arguing schism and all that stuff. You know, the old joke, everybody mocks a Catholic priest until they need an exorcist. Well, everybody, to add on to that, everybody mocks a traditional priest until there's no more mass available. You know, some commentators famously on social media were criticized because during the pandemic, when the masses were closed and even certain traditional masses were closed, there was only a handful of traditional priests offering the mass, and you had to know how to get there. And some of them did. They went to an irregular priest to receive the sacraments.
Oh,
now,
I mean,
and they made it known. They were like,
yeah.
So you see it's one of those things where it's like, you make fun or you criticize or you name call, whatever. But when it comes down to the salvation of your soul, a valid priest who's teaching the faith, giving you the valid sacraments as a valid priest, that's going to save your soul. So and we are definitely in that time. It doesn't matter if you're a Roman, SSPX, Sedevacantist. If you're valid, you're valid. And if you preach in the faith, you're living the faith, people will find you and they'll come to you when needed. So, you know, we are in those times. It doesn't matter what flavor of tradition you are, but if you're tradition and you're a priest and you're valid, that's. But I digress on that. I just found that interesting. You know, just a funny joke on. But that's where we're at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, and speaking of faithful, you know, we do need, people do need themselves to manifest support for tradition. And, you know, it's beginning to work. It's beginning to have an effect. I read recently that Peter's Pence donations are way down. Now, of course, most of that probably will be a reaction to clerical abuse, which is, of course, a serious, has been a serious crisis and blow to the church, which, you know, they still haven't sorted. Francis is not sorting that out properly. But again, you know, if you are Catholic, and if you want to be Catholic, if you claim to be Catholic, you must go where Catholics are. You must go where the Catholic faith is. You must go where the Catholic religion is practiced. And sad to say, that is not in the majority of parishes today. And you've got to start, this is, you know, an appeal to the faithful, you've got to start supporting tradition, and not propping up the new order, not propping up the conciliar church, because you know, Supich and Tobin and Roche and all these plebs will continue to do what they do because you give them the money to do it. And let's face it, and you know, we know from, you know, the McCarrick affair, from the expose on Wuerl, and others, these guys, goodness knows how they do it, but they squirrel your money away. They don't live lives of seclusion and austerity in a monastery when they retire, and they feel, you know, they have no qualms living like princes before their retirement. You know, if you really want things to change in the church, you've got to hit them in the pockets. But if you want true tradition and true Catholicism to survive, you've got to support it financially too. You need to support the chapels. You need to support the priests. You need to support the mass centres, etc. And stop propping up the institutional church. Stop propping up the Novus Ordo, because until things get bad for them personally, they will continue to do what they do.
Oh, I mean, you look at the Archbishop of Washington. Before he moved to Washington, he built himself a $2 million house. And, people became aware of it. And eventually, because of the scandal it caused, he was forced to sell it. But obviously, at some point, he thought nothing of it. And he thought that he deserved a $2 million house. I mean, what shepherd lives in a $2 million home? I'm not to say that, these historic buildings or that a bishop and an archbishop of consequence should have accommodation, not just for himself, but to meet other people and visitors to the diocese. And, it's not that he should live in a council flat, but there has to be some sort of balance, and that's where your money's going, to these vain men with vain ideas, who want to live in the lap of luxury while instructing people, to turn off their heat and turn off their lights to save the environment. So it's, but I wish people would stop and think. Just take a minute, scratch your head and go, there's something wrong with this picture. Should I continue to support this picture? Or should I withhold it and give it to people, Catholics, who are making a difference? And I'm not just saying about traditional Catholics, although we need and can use your support. And I make this vow to you today: it will not go towards a $2 million house. It'll go towards a mission. But even within the church, the new church, missionary orders of nuns that are working genuinely with the poor, educating the poor, bringing much needed medicine and relief to isolated and impoverished communities around the world, doing what their founders and foundresses had designed for them, remaining faithful to their religion and tradition, and having Christ at the center of everything they do. They're deserving of your money and of your prayers and support. But just be judicious about where you want to place your widow's mite. Be that a small amount of coins in a basket, or the checkbooks out with your silver pen. Whatever you can afford, make sure it's going to the right place, not for apartments or condos, flats in posh parts of London, mansions in the southern states of America, or whatever other vainglories that are going on, or towards cover-ups or paying hush money. It's all there, and we all know it. We can't say we don't know, because it's been on the front of every newspaper in the past 20 plus years.
Well, there are two dioceses in America in just in the last 2 weeks that are declaring themselves bankrupt.
Yeah. Well, of course, that can also be an excuse. That can be a way of protecting funds that already exist if they have. When people hear, oh, they declared bankrupt, they must have nothing. No, they're protecting what they have.
That's a legal move.
Again, it can be. I'm not going to say everyone's doing it, but it can be a misuse of the law of bankruptcy and insolvency rules and regulations. But yeah, the whole thing is a scandal and a mess. And I think, instead of trying to, not wash your dirty linen in public and put on a brave face to those whom we meet, I think we should all be shouting, "The emperor has no clothes." Say what it is, lance the boil, get on with it, sort it out. You said earlier, Your Grace, that to what we need is the Pope to do away with the new mass, go back to basics, and start again. Well, the Pope Francis is seen as the Pope of humility, and that indeed would be the humble thing to do, but it won't, because you would have to say, we got it wrong. We launched this experiment, it was wrong, it didn't work, and we're returning to basic. I can't imagine the egos that parole the marble halls of Rome would ever find the humility to do that. The example is set by Peter himself. Once he realized, once the cock crew, he went out and wept. And then only after the resurrection was he given the command to feed my sheep. And what a conversion that was. What an act of humility. 1 minute he's being told that he is the rock on which I will build my church. He's given the keys of heaven. He's told he will betray the Lord. In all his pomposity, says, oh no, I could never do that. He turns around and does it. And then repents and turns his life around and becomes the great pastor. Even to the end of his days, where our Lord in legend asks him, where's thou goest? Yeah. But I'm not going to hold my breath or skip a meal over the hope that the people in Rome will do that. They should. But and what an example that would be. What a positive scandal, if you know what I mean. That would be, what a headline splashed across the newspapers of the world would bring to people. A true act of humility, a true act of the truth, and a true pastoral and shepherding act with the care of souls at the center, not the care of self.
And just to interject on these points, when it comes to the fundings and the monies, obviously the Catholic Church has a long tradition, and like here in the Archdiocese of Chicago, they have the beautiful mansion that has been in the Archdiocese care for decades, and has gotten a lot of criticism. The Judas statement of, well, couldn't we sell this property to give to the poor? We're not talking necessarily about that in the funds and stopping the funds. We're talking about the Archbishop down in Georgia. He made something new. We're not talking about dissolving what has been established from the ancestry of the faith, because that often gets criticized when it comes to money scandals. In many dioceses. So yeah, I just want to make that clarification, just so people understand that what has been part of the tradition in the assets we have in the church currently. Because it's like the Pope. He's not living in the papal mansion right now. All these funds are going for his cost of living in a hotel, when it would be way cheaper for him to be humble and live in the papal mansion that has appointed to the office that he is, which
are in fact very, very humble, plain suite of rooms. When
we say so,
but you look at these mansions. I certainly wasn't saying that. I mean, the reason why the original residence for the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Chicago was built and was given by poor, but maybe not so poor, but working men and women and families, was a reaction to to anti-Catholicism in the United States at the time, to say, we have arrived, we should be taken seriously. The This is where our cardinal, our spiritual leader, lives. And he's on a par with the establishment, not something to be looked down upon, not just the religion of immigrants and suspicion, which, let's face it, was last grossly manifest with the election of Kennedy, and the anti-Catholicism that produced was lying under the surface, but still is today in certain circumstances in the United States. So the reason for building that building was very different from the mansion in Georgia, which was basically a palatial crash pad. Not a statement or a bolstering or a witness to the faith, or a demand for acceptance of our religion, but it wasn't just a gross misuse of funds, basically.
Yeah.
And it wasn't given by the people for that purpose. Nobody said, the bishop didn't say, look, I need your money because I need a swimming pool and a 5-car garage. Whereas the original mansion was, I need your money because we need to make a statement here. We need to say we have arrived and we will no longer be treated as second-class citizens. So, yeah, I mean, all of these things are in context. I mean, you look at the palaces of cardinals and popes in Rome, the Quirinale, which was the palace, the residence of the Pope, which is now the Italian, is it presidential residence or?
Yeah.
Anyway, it belongs to the Italian state now. But these things, I mean, the papacy was a temporal power as well as a spiritual power. It was a ruler of the country, and you have the king of Naples, and he had his palaces, and the Doge in Venice, and why wouldn't the Pope have that? It's not to say there wasn't corruption in other areas, but it was perfectly normal for a head of state to live in that fashion. But there is a difference when it comes to, I don't want to accuse anybody of money laundering, but certainly purchasing of real estate in affluent areas of London, arguably one of the most expensive cities for real estate in the world, or $2 million mansions for bishops in this day and age. I think there's a world of difference between the two, and we must understand them in their historical and political context.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's a good time to wrap up for this week. Thank you both for interesting conversation, and thank you, our viewers, and some interesting comments, particularly on the YouTube channel. So if you didn't catch them live, then I think you'll be able to see them afterwards. And are we here next week?
I should be around. Yeah.
I'll be at work.
Okay,
I
and
think
then
I'm available.
That will probably be our last episode this side of Easter. Next week, so a week tomorrow, of course, will be tomorrow is the first Sunday in Passiontide. Next week will be Palm
Sunday. Yep.
So that will be our last episode this side of Easter. So until then, we look forward to seeing you then. I haven't been able to this week, but I will make good on my promise last week to begin vlogging on the Old Roman Patreon channel. So if you haven't subscribed through Patreon yet, please consider doing so, as you won't want to miss my ruminations, etc. on there. I'll just put that up, and of course you can get some excellent merchandise by subscribing through Patreon as well. Otherwise, of course, every day on this channel the Mass, the Angelus, the Rosary, etc., continue to be published. And don't forget to check theoldroman.com for daily updates and suggestions for articles to read from the Catholic World Press and across Catholic YouTube. All sorts of things of interest, both topical, doctrinal, etc. there. So it's theoldroman.com. Don't forget to check that out. Okay.
Prayer blessing, your grace, Your Excellency. Short one.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Shall I go? Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Oremus. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater
Dei,
ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostri. Amen.
Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, quid voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra.
Nostrum quotidianum nobis hodie, et nobis debitum nostrum, debitoribus nostris in nos, inducat in tentationem, sed libera nos malo.
Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto.
Sicut erat in principio, nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen.
Sit nomen Domini benedictum.
Et hoc nunc in usque et saeculorum.
Auditorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Qui fecit caelum et terram.
Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et manet semper.
Amen.
Lovely. As always, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your support of this channel. If you haven't and you would like to, then just look at the show notes or the notes underneath, whatever platform you're viewing on. Links are there to give. Otherwise, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from them.